Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tom Teedy.
If I can remember what's in there. So Ford Motor Company again. So the point is that companies to stay competitive need to continue to adapt their products and services. And also fundamental to distribution is getting the right product to the right place at the right time. And it's really all about convenience, right? Customers demand convenience. I demand convenience as a consumer. Unfortunately, there are companies that provide the convenience that we're looking for. A prime example is Amazon. For those that everyone's aware of Amazon. So today, they have over 450 facilities throughout the globe, many of which are in the U.S. And today, they have a facility within a day's delivery to over half of the U.S. population. And within 20 miles, to within about 50% of all U.S. households earning about $50,000 a year, which is their target market. And if you go online, in the various ways you can go online, you have access to about 600 million products. That's crazy. Not all of which are in their facilities, but primarily through their many third-party seller relationships. And if you're an Amazon Prime member, among their many services is free delivery for many of their products. So if you think about it, I have 600 million products at my fingertips or via voice, via my Alexa device, that I can get delivered for free, in many cases just a few miles from my home. That's convenient. That's awfully convenient. So the result of this is really driving an Amazon effect in the U.S. and certainly across the globe. So there's a chart that I'd love to show you, but there's a company called Bespoke, and what they do is they plot the annual financial performance of Amazon in comparison to our largest 1,500 companies, the S&P 1500. Do I have it? Oh, there we go. That was my cool chart. That's the Model T. So the right place at the right time is all about convenience. And for those of you that were in the prior session, and just talking about Amazon, certainly they're all about convenience, and as a result, they're projected in the very near future to own about 50% of all online retail sales in the U.S. And if I do my math right, that's about 5% of all retail in the U.S. And the thing is, I know as Michael mentioned in the earlier session, they're not even the biggest player in the market. Alibaba and JD.com have both dwarfed the single-day sales of Amazon. And certainly here, Take-A-Lot's growing by leaps and bounds. So there's something to the Amazon effect. So this is that cool chart I was about to talk through. So that's Amazon in that dark blue line. That's their financial performance just for about a year in time. It's a little bit dated, but you can see they've grown quite substantially financially. That light blue line is our top 1,500 companies. And then the two red lines are two retail groups. One called the Death by Amazon group. That's made up of large traditional retailers, and you can see their financial performance is almost a mirror image of Amazon. That's not good. Many of which, since this chart was originally created, have gone out of business. Many are struggling to survive, and our largest players in retail are, frankly, I know our two largest retailers in the U.S. are investing billions, that's with a B, to reinvent their supply chain capability in an attempt to match the convenience and capability or provides unique services that differentiate Amazon from Amazon. And of course, cost, the fourth fundamental, will always be important in distribution, but cost is relative to other considerations like convenience. So what that means is companies should never minimize their investment in distribution if it in any way hinders their ability to grow into new markets and sales channels, to offer new services, or to simply compete. But the goal isn't to compete and survive, the goal is to win. And companies that compete to win invest in innovation. And those that don't, inevitably, either fade away or become a shell of what they once were. So using Amazon as another example, they've invested heavily in technology. Several years ago, they invested in Kiva. In fact, they bought them for $775 million. And you see these little orange units here? They're essentially self-driving vehicles that go out into the facility, gather these shelves of inventory, and then bring it back to an operator so that they can do their job. They're goods-to-person system. And the benefit is that they eliminate all that travel time and cost in the warehouse. I think they have about 45,000 of these things across their fulfillment network. Now, more recently, what they've been doing is investing or sponsoring an annual robotic picking challenge with the eventual goal to replicate the human capability to pick product out of a location or out of a tote. So looking forward, you can think about it. It's just a matter of time until those technologies merge. And there'll be facilities at Amazon or elsewhere that have these little self-driving units equipped with robotic picking capability and eliminating much, not all, but much of the picking labor in more advanced facilities. So what Amazon is doing, and other companies like Amazon, perhaps not to the grand scale of Amazon, but they're proving that there is a business case for innovation in order to continually improve their ability to provide the right product to the right place at the right time and at the right cost, but also to improve service by improving their operational speed, which provides that convenience factor to consumers that allows them to beat their competition and ultimately to sustain growth. That's the goal. So fortunately, we believe we're at the tipping point for the business case for innovation, not only due to the need to compete or to compete to win, but also due to rising labor costs. Certainly here in South Africa, we're seeing that. But also, in many cases, a decreasing cost in technology, primarily driven to large new entrants in mature technologies and a number of new entrants in emerging technologies. So what are some of the technologies, both historically and moving forward? So there are pallet handling systems like automated guided vehicles and automated storage and retrieval systems. ASRS are particularly popular in Europe due to the cost of land. It's less costly to go up than out. Carousel systems, very good for small units, slow-moving items, but not particularly fast. Carton and unit sortation systems that are great at managing that many-to-many relationship in a facility, where I have thousands upon thousands of products, in many cases needing to go to hundreds, if not thousands of destinations, and they need to do it at minimal cost and confusion. Moving more to the right, we've seen great advancement over the years in other goods-to-person technology like crane-based systems and shuttle-based systems that are also good. They're an advancement of the throughput capacity and storage density in many cases of the traditional carousel systems. We've seen the advancement of self-driving vehicles, which in a way are like automated guided vehicles, but they can get to A to B without following that same fixed path. And we've also seen the maturity of robotic palletizing, which helps in reducing the labor and the safety concerns associated with repetitive palletizing and depalletizing product. Moving more to the right, we're seeing the emergence of collaborative robots or cobots. So think, for example, of a self-driving vehicle similar to that orange Kiva unit, equipped with a user screen that's interfaced directly with a warehouse management system, then help do some of that supplemental activity like opportunistic replenishment without having to send labor to do that. Exoskeletons, not so much in distribution yet, but it's been rolling out in manufacturing to help with repetitive, heavy, or awkward lifting. But certainly there's an application in distribution for that. And of course, warehouse execution systems. There's huge investment in the industry to merge the warehouse management system responsible for managing orders and inventory with the warehouse control system responsible for controlling the movement of product throughout the material handling system, to one day just have one holistic application that interfaces directly with your host and manages all activity and controls all product movement in the facility. More in the pilot phase with the advancement of vision and sensing systems, we're seeing a lot of emerging players in picking bots, picking product. We're now seeing drones in the warehouse. So Walmart, for example, our largest brick and mortar retailer in the US, has rolled out drones in some of their facilities to do the cycle counting in the bulk storage locations. And now we're seeing the next generation of smart glasses for use in the warehouse for potential replacement of RF-based or voice picking. Then moving further to the right, think of the smart glass then with a huge clear screen where you're projecting all sorts of information on it for task-directed activity or supplementary information for that operator. Or autonomous spots, similar to what I talked about with the Amazon example, where you have these self-driving vehicles equipped with robotic hands roaming the facility. And then we're seeing, obviously, early experimentation to humanoid bots for several years out from that. And then, if I remember my movie history correct, we're eventually going to get to the Terminator bot, but hopefully not in our lifetimes. So one question is, where do I start? Well, business needs, it's not about the technology necessarily, business needs to determine where to focus innovation and technology. So the first step is to identify the burning platform, the key business imperative, the key opportunity in your business, and then go from there. So in distribution, somewhat typically, the burning platform, at least most of the opportunity is in picking. Somewhat typically, somewhat on average, that you'll find is that the picking labor constitutes about half of the labor cost in a facility. But if you dive a little deeper into picking, what we often find is actually very little time spent actually picking product. Most of the time is traveling to and from the location, particularly with slow-moving product that's widely dispersed, or searching for it. Once I get there, some measure of administrative activity. So there's huge opportunity if you can find the right solution to minimize that wasted time and cost. So an example, what we will do in designing a facility is we'll gather all the item master data for every SKU that's going in that facility. Then we'll gather all of the order transaction history for several months or a year, and we'll plot it. And that helps us identify what class of technology may make sense for a mass of SKUs. And in this example, there's a relatively high amount of slow-moving SKUs that require a relatively low cubic footprint in forward storage, which is ideally suited for goods-to-person technology that reduces the time and waste and cost of traveling in a facility. Then what we will do is then look at alternative technologies within that class of technology, such as a shuttle-based system. Shuttle-based systems provide tremendous throughput in comparison to the old carousel system. And they provide very high storage density of forward storage, but they're pretty expensive. So we'll look at that. We may look at a mini-load system, which is somewhat similar to a shuttle-based system, but doesn't provide the same throughput or storage density. And then we'll also compare to a carousel-based system. And then it's a matter of identifying which alternative provides the best business case. What we want to do is identify the alternative that provides the highest value relative to the investment. That's our business case. So in terms of value, how do we drive value? So think, if we can identify a technology or innovative approach that allows us, for example, to free up capacity in the facility, that enables the business to free up some additional growth and free up some additional revenue and incremental margin associated with that, with the right solution, there's tremendous value in that. If we can identify a solution that improves quality or service or flexibility to the business, there's great value in that. And certainly there's great value if we have a solution that appeals to the decision maker. I can tell you, if you have an alternative or a recommendation that doesn't appeal to the decision maker, it's not going to get decided to move forward. Dead on arrival. And on the denominator side, as we know, there's great value if we can reduce time and cost or working capital like inventory or even taxes. Years ago, I justified completely reconfiguring a pharmaceutical manufacturer's distribution network in the U.S., primarily just on reducing income taxes. And there's great value if we can reduce business risks at the boardroom level with the right solution. And certainly, as we know, there's great value if we can reduce risk to the decision maker. And of course, there's going to be much scrutiny on any large-scale investment. And investment comes in two forms. There's the capital assets. Those are tangible assets with a lifespan of more than a year that are depreciated over time. And those impact the balance sheet. And then there are non-capital assets that are treated as expenses, and those impact the income statement. Then it's a matter of translating the value in the investment into accounting terms. So I won't go through the details of this eye chart, but essentially translating value into cash flow, cash inflow, and translating the investment into the cash flow, the cash outflow, and how that impacts the balance sheet as well. And then filtering that through, and that allows you then to look at your key return on investment metrics, like payback period. How long does it take before I get my money back, till I break even? If I invest 10 million Rand, how long does it take until I earn back that 10 million? Net present value. At the end of the day, what's my net return? The higher the better. And an internal rate of return, which by definition is the percent rate of return on investment. Is it 10%, 20%, 50%? So for example, we have a client that had a 20% hurdle rate. So the internal rate of return needed to be much higher than 20% for them to even consider moving forward. And frankly, we struggled with achieving that. And it forced us to step back a little bit, look at the project a little bit more creatively, certainly more holistically. And once we did that, we were able to identify some complementary and real savings associated with the product. And now we're in the early stages, or with the project, and now we're in the early stages of implementation. So here's just a simple example. This isn't a math class, but I'll take you through a simple example of how that eye chart looks. So we take the value and translate that into a cash inflow year over year over the lifespan of the capital asset. We identify that the investment. In this simple example, it's assuming a 200,000 Rand capital investment in year 0, which we're going to depreciate, and then another 100,000 that first year in order to get it implemented in non-capital investment. As you can see, the net cash flow is a 300,000 Rand value. But we have to depreciate that capital asset. In this case, we're simply doing that on a straight line basis over 5 years, that 200,000 Rand. That then gets us to the net operating profit, which is then taxed. Unfortunately, taxes are a reality in life, which leads to the net cash flow. That's the real number. That's the number that's the important number. That's the number that you get to keep. And once you do that, then that allows you to look at your key ROI metrics, like net present value, which takes a look at net cash flow on the time value of money basis, or internal rate of return at 19% in this simple example. So that's what we do as part of developing a business case. Another important consideration is the cash flow horizon in doing this. An investment in a durable asset tends to last longer than non-durable assets. In distribution, as long as the company has use for that technology, it's not uncommon to have at least a 7 to 10 year cash flow horizon on that investment. So you can see that prior example, the difference between a 5-year cash flow horizon versus 7. So it's much easier, frankly, to justify the project looking at the number on the bottom versus the number at top. But it's the same project. And of course, we never look at an alternative in a vacuum. We need to compare it to alternatives at recommendations in comparison to something, even if it's against the cost of doing nothing. There's always an opportunity cost associated with doing nothing. But in this example, we're looking at another alternative. So which is the better investment? Well, it looks like it's B, but the answer is we don't know yet. Because ROI is only one of many decision criteria. And to come up with the right solution, we need to take a look at it on a very balanced way and look at all of the decision criteria that are important to make a big business decision. For example, what's the impact on people? Is there any way that we can successfully implement and operate one alternative, a more difficult alternative versus another? You have to evaluate that. What's the impact on systems? What's the impact on building and equipment? What's the impact on time, risk, and flexibility? Very importantly, what's the impact on other key business metrics or operating metrics or the incentive metrics of the decision maker? All important factors that need to be evaluated and condensed into a presentation, a recommendation to an executive in order for them to make a decision. So one way to look at that is that the recommendation ultimately needs to be persuasive. And I view it like 3 legs of a stool. If you're going to make a recommendation, it needs to be very logical. The math needs to make sense. The recommendation needs to be credible. Your trade-off analysis needs to be very objective. The assumptions need to be credible. You, as a recommender, need to be credible through some measure of experience or subject matter expertise in what you're recommending. And certainly it needs to have personal appeal. You can be logical, you can be credible, but if there's no personal appeal to the decision maker or the decision-making body, it's not going to go forward. So another way to look at this as appealing to both sides of the brain of a decision maker. Science will tell you that most decisions are made by us on the right side of the brain. That's the emotional side. That's the instinctive side. That's the intuitive side. But we'll look to the left side of the brain to rationalize the decision that we made. In a way, it's kind of like confirmation bias. We have a strong point of view, whether it's right or wrong, and then we'll look to the environment for information to support our point of view, right or wrong. But that's kind of how the brain works. So it's important to think of that in attempting to persuade a decision maker. It's just not about the math. It's not about the ROI. It's not about being very objective. Ultimately, it needs to appeal to the decision maker. So it's good to ask questions like, is the decision maker a risk taker or are they risk averse? Are they an innovator or are they more tried and true? Does the recommendation create an issue for them or does it solve one? And in any way, do you know how this recommendation may personally impact their incentive structure? Those are important factors. And of course, we can't forget risk. There always risk in an implementation. I shouldn't say yet. I've met very few decision makers throughout my career that were willing to make a bet-the-career decision on a high-risk investment. So as a recommender, it's very important to look at risk through the eyes of the decision maker and help manage and control that risk for them. So this is just an example. There are many ways to do that, but this would be an example of one way to do that with emerging technology. It's not always feasible when you can. For example, these self-driving vehicles. Just start small. Learn as much as you can about the technology on your own, but also through those that are more on the bleeding edge of that technology. Then if it makes sense, start with the pilot. Start small. Bring it in-house. Learn the benefits. Learn the challenges. And then from that, you're in a much better position to have confidence whether there is or is not a business case to launch the deployment on a broader scale. Very importantly, too, is to get to the decision that you want for the decision to move forward. It's very important to conduct a series of the meetings before the meeting. So how many of you have gone into a final presentation and been highly confident about your recommendation, only to come away from that meeting disappointed, surprised, perhaps embarrassed by the outcome? It happens. It's happened to many of us, if not all of us. So one way to combat that is through conducting the series of meetings before the meeting with each of the individual stakeholders that are important to making that decision. And socialize the recommendation. Understand their concerns. Address their concerns. Perhaps alter your recommendation along that path before the meeting. And when you do that, and you do that well, what you'll find in many cases is that meeting becomes what I call a non-event. It's a ceremonial event where you're essentially agreeing as a group to something, to a recommendation that you've already agreed to in individual conversations. That's best practice. So just to reiterate the point, best practice to get the decision moving forward is to avoid surprises during that final presentation, because it never turns out well when there are surprises. And you do that by conducting a series of the meetings before the meeting. So also, in order to get the decision that you want, that you're striving for, it's very important to develop a very condensed executive-level presentation that essentially tells a story. Tells a story with the decision maker as the protagonist in that story. So this is just an example of an outline. So the first page, what are the objectives of the meeting? What do we need to get accomplished at this meeting? If you're expecting a decision, make that clear on the first page. And then quickly provide some context and background to the story, to the project itself, particularly for those that haven't been as involved as you have, to make sure that everyone's basically on the same page. And very importantly, Dan, is what's the burning platform for the business? What's the key business imperative? What's the key opportunity for the business moving forward that we want to address as part of this discussion today? And what's the recommendation? What's the recommendation? What do we compare again? What are the alternatives that we looked at? And what's the trade-off analysis? What's the impact of that recommendation, including the financial impact? And of course, we can't ignore risk. Risk is real. So very quickly identify what are the most probable risks that have the potential highest impact. And most importantly, identify how we, or the company, needs to manage and control that risk in order for this decision, this important decision for the business, to go forward. And then outline the implementation roadmap for their journey ahead in order to be successful. And very importantly, make it very clear at the end of the meeting, what are the next steps? Don't leave it hanging. What needs to happen? What do we plan to happen right after this discussion? Whether it's to address additional concerns, or more importantly, to launch the project moving forward so we can start generating the savings, the benefits, or alleviate the issue as quickly as possible. So if I were to just summarize the outline for building a persuasive executive level business case for innovation or technology, or for anything really for that matter, it's first start with the burning platform or the key opportunity for the business. Evaluate those alternative solutions. Very importantly, identify the financial impact of those solutions and how they compare, and what the other trade-off analysis across the business for not just the ROI, but other things like people, processes, systems, billing, and equipment, key metrics. Very importantly, appeal to the decision maker, or ultimately it's not going to go through. For example, we had a project years ago. We did the design work, and this was about a year after the network strategy was done, where they decided how many facilities they should have in the U.S. And we're building a nice West Coast facility. And the question always in the back of my mind is, why are we putting this West Coast facility in and still keeping the Wisconsin facility open? Well, when one of the prior consultancies did the network analysis, they said, well, you should only have 2 facilities in the network, one in Tennessee, one in California. This Wisconsin facility needs to go away. But the decision maker, where do you think he lived? He lived in Wisconsin. His family was there. His friends were there. At 4:30 every day when we had design sessions, he would start to get antsy because he needed to meet his friends at the bar by 5 o'clock. So the decision was altered, right? It wasn't perhaps ideal, but it was very good for the business to move forward. So it's, just to reiterate, appeal to the decision maker, and also understand and manage and control risk for them, because they are real. You're not credible if you don't recognize and plan to manage and control risk. Of course, have the meetings before the meeting to avoid surprises. So much energy out of an idea, a recommendation, a project can be lost with a bad meeting. It's hard to regain it, so make sure you prepare well in advance. And of course, develop an executive level business case to facilitate the conversation. Very few pages, but make sure it tells a story that leads to an obvious conclusion that we need to get started, and we need to get started right now. So if I were to just summarize today's session, we went through the fundamentals of distribution, helped put this discussion in context. Really, it's all about getting the right product. Pretty simple. It's getting the right product to the right place at the right time, and at least a reasonable cost, perhaps not the lowest cost, but a reasonable cost in comparison to other factors. We talked through the prevailing threat of the Amazon effect, its impact on retailers, and how it's driving the business case for innovation. And I believe it's going to drive the business case for innovation here as well in South Africa, as evidenced by Takealot's growth and if others potentially moving into the market that are able to provide a more convenient service platform than you are today, because it's largely about convenience. We talked through just a few of the many innovative technologies in distribution, both historically and moving forward. And of course, I just outlined a process for developing an executive level presentation for the recommendation. With that, I'll open it up to questions. And in doing so, I don't fancy myself necessarily an expert in a lot of the technologies, but for those of you that have experience or would like to chime in on what you found, certainly stand up and share your point of view. And if no questions, I'll happily give you back your 20 minutes.
Any questions from the audience? They're still thinking the business case. I think.
The way things are moving, the speed at which things are moving.
Yeah, with as long as the technology is still in use. So we tend to, the thing I like about our approach is we tend to be very pragmatic in how we design a facility. It's not about the theory, it's about how well it's going to work in the future. So we design in flexibility for its use over time. Certainly it's difficult to predict with accuracy what the future will be. So we don't assume that we know precisely what your volume is going to be, what your business is going to look like. But we try to put enough capacity on the side of our analysis when we work with when we design and implement technologies. We tend to focus primarily on proven technologies. So, for example, I talked about carton and unit sortation systems. Those are very proven, and they manage that many-to-many relationship in a facility very, very well. And they have multiple uses across both direct to retail and e-com.
Any other questions?
All right. Thanks, folks. I appreciate your time. Have a great conference.